Good. All right. So welcome back, everybody, to our Aleph-Bet Mishnah class. I want to begin each session with a quick review of the previous week's material. That's just a standard method for me for studying this kind of material because it's been a week since we've looked at it. So unless you guys went back and reviewed over the past week. But it's been a week since we looked at it. And so, you know, you can sort of forget and not keep those things in the front of your mind. And so by reviewing, you bring that learning back in and hopefully commit that material a little deeper into the archives. Hi, Suzanne. All right, let me pull up the text here. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Last week we studied the Bet and the Gimel Mishnah. If you recall, the Bet Mishnah was from Masechet Megillah, and we talked about a hierarchy of financial sales and what level of holiness the money from those sales accrued, and what you could buy with the profit from the sale of holy items, and how that did not work in the reverse order, that you couldn't sell holy things and buy less holy things. And we ended up having a longer conversation about how that might actually limit your ability to beneficially traffic in holy property, like selling a Torah from a large community to a small community, that there are times where the law, even if well-intentioned, can prevent you from doing good things. And, you know, you can't only make legal arguments. You also have to, or philosophical arguments, you also have to consider how those things actually play themselves out when the law is applied. We also talked a little bit about how this might apply to, for lack of a better phrase, tainted money. In other words, money brought to a nonprofit by somebody who acquired that money in an unethical way. And could you redeem that money by doing something good with ill-gotten gain, or did you have to deny that money because it carries with it the energy of how it was acquired? And that was really our conversation. The other Mishnah that we looked at was the Mishnah in Masechet Chulin, which deals with the Gid Hanasheh, the sciatic nerve, and the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, and how strictly it's applied in and outside the land of Israel, while the temple and even after the temple, in sacrifices and in regular slaughter, right side and left side. And then we considered a couple of leniencies and sort of envelope pushing applications of the law, and questioned at the very end, in the name of Rabbi Meir, why people who have a financial interest in something might not be allowed to offer testimony in court about that thing. Wow, that was a lot in just two Mishnayot, right? Yes, that's the great thing about this. It's really, these are small but very intense pieces of material. All right, moving on. We're going to look
Rabbi,
at yes.
Just before we move on, I don't know how much. Last Thursday night after your class, Hadassah and the Federation sponsored a lecture at the museum. I don't know how many people heard it. It's called Afterlife, and it talked about stories of looted art. Anyway, the woman told a story about the Jewish community of Munich who sold their synagogue and they used the money to send the children out of Germany. They saw the writing on the wall in the late 1930s. It was so apropos of our
Wow.
discussion. So
That-
I think that qualifies.
I think that qualifies. I do too. Wow, that's really amazing. What a story, huh? And the story of so much of that art and the displacement and disposition of art in Europe in World War II is really fascinating. And a lot of it has to do with Jews. Yeah, Jews were in the art movement and patrons of it, as we still are. We see its value. All right. Thank you, Suzanne. Just so we again locate where we are in the larger Mishnah, we're going to study the first Mishnah in Mishnah Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is over here in Seder Nizikin, and pretty much all of this whole Seder deals with, can you see it? No, I'm not sharing.
No, we can't.
I'm sorry. I'm talking about, I see it on my screen, but I realize I haven't shared it. Hold on here. There we go. We're in Seder Nizikin, Masechet Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin it's actually a Greek word, and it refers to the large court. There was the big Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, a court of 70 people, and there were smaller Sanhedrin, 20 plus people courts in a couple of other places. But if you're just saying the Sanhedrin, you mean the big one, like the Supreme Court kind of thing, located in Jerusalem. But there can sometimes be other courts referred to by that Greek word. Most of Seder Nizikin deals with courts, damages, contracts, the structure of courts, testimonies, corporal punishment, all of that kind of thing. Okay. Now, Mishnah Sanhedrin 1:1. Dinei mamonot bishlosha. Monetary cases, lawsuits that deal with money, are judged with 3 judges. In the ancient Jewish court system, this may be hard to believe, but in the ancient Jewish court system, there were no lawyers. Judges conducted the proceedings and called witnesses and ran the whole proceedings, and the voting of the judges determined the outcome of the case. So there's no jury, there's no jail, there's no lawyers. Okay, cases are brought before an official court and the judges adjudicate the case. So in monetary cases, you have 3 judges. Can you give me an example of a monetary case?
Would it be like a civil judgment?
Okay, so for
Or like
example,
damages?
No, because damages are coming. We're going to look at
Okay.
damages in a second.
Maybe somebody did a piece of work and wasn't paid for it.
Yes, right? You say, he owes me $1,000. And I say, I paid you $1,000, or I don't owe you $1,000. Contract disputes, disputes over sales, things like that. Disputes over ownership. All those have to do with money, and those are judged with 3 judges. Gezelot vechavalot, theft and personal injury. In other words, I say, you stole from me. That's my car. Or I say, he broke my arm. Those are also judged with 3 judges. Damage and half damage, nezek vechatzi nezek, and tashlumei kefel v'tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha bishlosha. Cases of damage and cases of half damage, where that means some cases the Torah requires you to pay half the value of something that you damaged, and some cases it requires you to pay the full value of things that you damaged. And other times you are required to pay kind of punitive penalties. So you might have to pay double the amount of damage, or even 4 or 5 times. Those are according to verses in the Torah. All of those are judged with 3 judges. So it's a wide range of different kinds of cases, most of which will involve monetary compensations. Here comes the difficult part of this mission. Ha'ones v'hamafteh v'hamotzi shem ra bishlosha divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir adds these 3 more criminal-like things. He says rape and violation, that means assault, and giving a bad name, slander or libel, are also judged with 3 judges, according to Rabbi Meir. But the sages say giving a bad name is judged with 23 because it is a capital crime. What? You should be scratching your head.
Yeah.
Good, you should be, but you should know that we can make sense of this. First, let's just talk about the first half, okay? All of that makes perfect sense. Why do you need 3 judges?
So you can have a majority.
Right, you can't have an even number of judges. And you see that at the end, 23 is the other number, also a odd number. 11 to 11, is not justice. A decision has to be made in cases. The money belongs to A or to B. You can't say everybody's happy, right? That scene from Fiddler on the Roof. He's right. He's right. Oh, you're right too, right? Like that's not a successful judicial process. And 3 is a very workable number, right? You want a low number because there's going to be a lot of these kinds of cases. Damages, torts, property things, all that stuff. I mean, this is daily, that's the daily bread and butter of courts. I don't know if you're like me, but it feels a little bit uncomfortable, right? To throw in things like rape and assault into a similar category. Although we are also talking about personal injury and theft and damage. So it's not that none of those other things are criminal. And again, you have to remember there's no jail, right? You don't get sent to jail for sexual assault in the ancient world. You have to pay, right? There is a financial penalty imposed upon you for what you did. It's personal injury. This is going to sound very crass, so please understand. I'm saying it knowing that. It could affect the value of a bride in marriage. So, that could aside from the trauma of it, it could result in quite significant financial damage to the victim. And so there are financial aspects to all those cases. And Rabbi Meir is trying to say these cases judicially have to be resolved by a court that understands finances and how to administer financial penalties. Before we get to this last sentence, though, any questions about any of that? And again, I want to say you don't have to like that. Right? You don't have to like that. I kind of don't like it, but I do understand it. It's not saying it's okay to assault somebody. It's saying once all damages. I mean, it's not okay to cut somebody's arm off through negligence, or break their leg, or injure them so that they can't work, or steal from them, or claim that they didn't pay you back when they did. So all those things are wrong. And how do you make them right? How could you possibly, you can't take back what has happened. So there has to be, as we saw in the Mishnah about selling property, money carries valence. Money is a means to transfer value. It's not empty. I mean, it can be. It's a container that can contain holiness and justice. Punitive damages. Your actions actually lowered that person's ability to earn for themselves. They injured them in a way that has serious long-term consequences to them, and you embarrassed them, harmed them emotionally. Those are all aspects of determining the punitive damages. Pain and suffering were one of the things that these judges were supposed to adjudicate in arriving at compensation for all of these kinds of things. The last sentence, and then we'll talk about this in a second. The only place the sages disagree is with regard to slander or libel, motzi shem ra, motzi shem ra, to give a bad reputation to somebody. And the sages are making a value statement here more than anything else. And they're doubling down on a notion in rabbinic literature that slandering someone is akin to killing them. That's a philosophical belief, but it's a pretty good one, even if it seems kind of harsh. Obviously, sticks and stones may break my bones, all that kind of thing. But this is not just name calling, right? This is not like saying not nice things to somebody. This is when you damage their reputation. And that can be like a death sentence for people. You can never recover from stuff like that, be it true or not, right? But especially if it's not true, that can have tremendous damage, really affect a person's life, ruin their life for the rest of their life. It's not that they believe slander is worse than sexual assault. Right? That's, I think, a misread of this Mishnah. If that's what it means, then we have a big problem. I don't think that's what it means. I think what it means is it recognizes that adjudication of sexual violation is going to involve financial compensation. And so it has to be adjudicated that way in the courts. And as opposed to motzi shem ra, which will also have financial aspect to it, but which they just saw as really, as uniquely devastating. Slander and libel are a uniquely devastating kind of thing, and they are akin to more capital and more serious crime. capital crime, not more serious, capital crime specifically, murders. Any questions about any of that? That's a lot in there, but yeah, Mickey, you're muted. Good.
All right. The fact that they have more judges, does that also mean that they are dealing with greater sums of money? Or is it just that it's more difficult to come to a conclusion?
I think it's more B than A, because a financial case can be billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the amount, it's not like grand larceny is 23 and plain old larceny is 3. I think their concern about capital cases, and we see this in a number of other Mishnayot, they did not want to do it. They did not like the idea that the Torah mandates capital punishment. How about that? The rabbis didn't like things about what the Torah said. They just still tried to take them seriously. And 23, it's a lot harder to make a mistake with 23 than it is with 3. And capital cases, because they will, if he's guilty, he will almost immediately be put to death. If you make a mistake, it's irreparable. You can't come back next week and say, oops, and bring him back to life. You know, if you give the money to the wrong person and next week you realize you're wrong, the court can go back and take the money and give it to the other person. Right. So if new evidence comes up to show that someone is guilty, you can repair the wrong decision. But in a capital case, you got to have that bulwark against wrong decision. Cindy and then Margaret.
Well, 2 things. One, I think that we have to, this is one of those times where we really have to look at the text through the eyes of when it was written and not through our modern eyes. And, you know, going back to what you said about, you know, it's not that rape wasn't important. It just, again, it had different consequences and connotations in that day. So, and the other thing is,
I'll only add to that, Cindy, and they were not women. Right. I mean, they knew women. They weren't unfamiliar with women, but they were not
the
women.
Sanhedrin was not women.
Right. They did not have that perspective.
And so, yes. And the other thing I was thinking of is the whole idea of, you know, slandering a person's reputation is like killing a person. It, you know, so capital punishment's like an eye for an eye. It's that story of like, if you break open a feather pillow and the feathers are, you know, out in the wind, you can't bring them back. So if you slander somebody or libel somebody, your words are out there like the feathers and they can't be brought back in.
Just like murder, you can't kill someone and then regret it and like go back and take it back.
Right. So that, you know, while it seems that like just like words is not as grave a sin as or an evil as all those other things that are in the Mishnah, I think that the rabbis were thinking that it's actually a greater sin than all those things, because, you know, by killing somebody's reputation, you're actually, like you said, Rabbi, you're like killing them and killing their, you know, just ending their life, even though they are physically sitting on the planet.
Yeah, thanks. That's excellent, Cindy. Margaret.
I had 3 thoughts. First of all, I was thinking about last week's Parsha and about, you know, how Moses's father-in-law told him to share, and so there was 1 judge, and now we've gotten up to 3 judges, and how the justice system sort of proliferates into more and more kind of pieces as time goes on.
As time goes on, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
The other minor thing that I was thinking of was one of Freud's famous cases, and I can't remember the name of the patient now, but he talked about soul murder. And this kind of reminds me of soul murder. And the last thing that I wanted to say, or it was really a question, and that was, I was thinking about the number 23. I mean, it's a huge number. And I was wondering about when this was written, the size of the communities in which these courts were occurring, and wondering if the large number of people, of judges, kind of meant that they were getting a lot of perspectives on what was heard in the community. So, 5 judges could have said, geez, I never heard about it. This wasn't, I've never heard the bad things about this guy. So maybe his reputation wasn't so damaged. And other people were saying that, yeah, they had heard this and it was a terrible blemish. I don't,
Yeah, it's,
history, I don't know.
so a couple of things I'll say about that. One is we don't know exactly to what extent this was what the courts were really like, right? Like, did they have these courts of 23 and, where, like, there's no court records to speak of. Like, you can't go and there's just no way to research that kind of stuff, right? To know, and especially not, in Nazareth, what was it like? Right? Like, that's a small town. I mean, there's just no records of any of that kind of stuff. So we don't really know, except for anecdotally reading in these sources, what they describe. And that's one thing. The other is people traveled for court, right? Like, you didn't just go to your district court. Like, if it was a big enough, like, there were, you had to go to Jerusalem, or you had to go to a big city to adjudicate a case. There wasn't necessarily a little court in every tiny little hovel village, or even a permanent court necessarily. So I really do like the idea, though, that the larger number by force brings greater perspective, and that the more important a decision is, the more necessary maybe a diversity of voices is, before the vote actually gets cast. Yeah.
Do we know for
very interesting. Yeah, Suzanne.
Do we know for a fact that they decided by majority rule? Maybe it had to be consensus.
No, it's majority. Right.
Okay.
Actually, it's there's a bunch of rules that make it easier to acquit somebody than to convict them, which again it's not technically just, right? It shouldn't necessarily, acquitting somebody is not necessarily the goal. It's acquitting the innocent is the goal, right? And punishing the guilty, that's the justice, right? It's not always, punishing is not always just, and acquitting is not always just, but they definitely leaned towards acquitting. For example, in a murder case, if they hear the case on day 1 of the trial, and they're prepared to vote not guilty on that day, they're allowed to vote on that day not guilty. But if they're going to vote guilty, they have to sleep on it and come back the next day and vote.
Well, that's like our justice system. You're innocent until proven guilty.
Theoretically.
Right, but they don't make them sleep on a decision of acquittal.
No.
Right, they make them sleep on a decision of guilt. But you're right. I mean, it leans towards that. And there's no question that Jewish law clearly preferences letting a guilty person go free over punishing an innocent person. And ideally, so does the American law system. That's the presumption of innocence. We believe it is far better for lots of guilty people to go free than for a single innocent person to be incarcerated. I wish we actually lived up to that, but that's a whole other story that we should and could get into. But that's a very important principle in law, right? Because this is a human process. These are human judges. They're fallible. They will make mistakes and find an innocent person guilty and find a guilty person innocent. So we need to set up the system in such a way that we make it a lot harder for an innocent person. That's the whole notion of due process. That is due everybody, because we want to make sure that we don't do that. Yeah, Barbara.
It's interesting to me that I don't agree. There are tons of opinions that U.S. is based on Judeo-Christian law, etc., and it wipes out the other groups. But we have changed. We no longer use 23, or we no longer require 23 judges. Yet we certainly have lots of slander and libel going on and being sent to court. So I see a great job opportunity here for us to add a whole bunch of judges to every single one of these. I mean, I'm ready to go back to law school, become a judge, do this.
Yeah.
But it's Judeo-Christian system.
Yeah. It's not really a Judeo-Christian system.
Oh, it is. You listen to the right people. You listen to the people who know, they will tell you.
And what that really means is Judeo-Christian means Christian. That's what it means.
Thanks for that translation.
And I am a bridge crosser, right? That is not because I do not believe in good Judeo-Christian relations, or that they come from us, right? I mean, there is crossover, tremendous. But when people say Judeo-Christian, what they mean is Christian. And in this case, and in our legal system's case, they mean Anglican Christian. Look, in our legal system, until relatively recently, you were incarcerated for debt. That's incredible. That's not Judeo. There's no incarceration for debt. You have to pay it back. Right, you have to pay it back. That's it. And if you can't, you have to do it anyways. You have to work for them. You have to work it off, whatever. I mean, but there's no debtor's prison. I mean, that's an un-Jewish notion, if ever there was one.
But maybe they finally figured out that if you were in jail for debt, you weren't working. You weren't going to be able to pay it back.
How are you going to pay it off? No, what yeshiva boy would come up with that idea?
Oh, they get their wife, who's the one who has the job, to go do it. Pay it back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, old school yeshiva boy, not new school yeshiva boy.
Okay.
Those guys, the old school guys, had jobs. Rabbi
Well,
Meir.
Absolutely.
Rabbi Meir was a tradesman.
Yeah.
He was a tradesman.
My rabbi had a department store. He worked.
What's that? Oh no, you turned yourself off, buddy.
Unmute
You
yourself.
muted yourself.
I said, my rabbi had a department store that employed my grandparents. So he had a good
Oh, that's good. All right, let's do one more. This comes from Mishnah Brachot. We did a Mishnah in Mishnah Brachot before. That was the one about tefillah and being in a serious state of mind when you do tefillah. This one's going to start with hey, and it's a lot lighter than the previous one. So, haro'eh makom shena'asu bo nisim liYisrael. A person who sees a place where a miracle was done for the Jewish people says the following blessing: Baruch she'asa nisim lavotenu b'makom hazeh. Blessed be the one who did miracles for our ancestors in this place. Very nice. So if you go to one of the places in the world where a miracle happened for the Jewish people, where you go to Mount Sinai, or you go to a well in the desert, to Beersheba, you should stop and acknowledge that something special in our history happened. And as a parallel to that, makom shene'ekra mimenu avodah zarah. If you visit a place in the land of Israel that had idol worship uprooted from it, you say, Baruch she'akar avodah zarah me'artzeinu. Blessed be God who uprooted idol worship from our land. Those seem fairly straightforward, at least linguistically. There are places in Eretz Israel that we know had idol worship in them. There are archaeological sites in Israel where archaeologists have decent evidence that there was human sacrifice performed in some of these places. Large stone altars, large enough for a person, human bones nearby in large numbers, children's bones nearby in large numbers. Things like that indicate that there were places where there was not just a little idol worship, but where idol worship was deeply entrenched in the land of Israel. And apparently the rabbis knew about these places too. Right? That there was sort of a let's go book of ancient miracle places and ancient places where idol worship used to be, and a kind of spiritual tourism. Right? When you go to this place, you recognize its holiness. I like this one because first of all, it's very simple, right? It's all very simple. I mean, I don't love the fact that it has the positive flipped on the negative, but okay, that doesn't bother me that much. But what I really like about these kinds of Mishnayot is they prompt me to think about what are the places here that I would consider American holy places, and which would be deserving of a blessing when visiting them, both in sort of an American holiness sense and in a Jewish American one. Like if I went to visit I'm trying to think of like the Newport Synagogue, the first synagogue on American soil. Is that an American holy place? Should I say a blessing? Praised be God who planted the Jewish people in this spot. Cindy, you're shaking your head no. Why? Eddie, you agree with her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it has to get down to a personal level. If you don't have a personal connection to it, you're not going to see it that way. I think that one would be pretty obscure, but for some people it might be Temple Bethel when they come there.
Right.
I just, I think that what the Mishnah is trying to tell us is that, okay, so the temple, people built the temple. God didn't build the temple. What the Mishnah was talking about, miracles that God, work that God did. So it would have, so building a building, even if it is a place of worship, would not satisfy that for me. It's more things that maybe we do as humans that bring God into the world.
Right.
And I can't think of what one of those miracles would be. I mean, probably something in the civil rights movement. I don't know if, maybe, the bridge in Selma, or, things where we as humans act God-like and create a miracle in a certain place by our actions.
Yes. So on the other hand, your point is well taken, that those aren't, God didn't cross the bridge in Selma. That was people, right? I mean, that was a people effort. And I know it's people because they got the crap beat out of them. So, right. It wasn't like on angel's wings, right? I mean, it was a struggle, human struggle. But I agree. I think there are, in the American milieu, it's a lot easier to think of places on the continent that are remarkable places, either where something wicked was uprooted, a la Selma or something like that, or someplace where, something incredible happened. It's not just a somber place. I guess that's part of the point, right? It's not just, this isn't like, oh, I visited a cemetery or Arlington, right? The Tomb of the Unknown, which we treat in America as like the most holy place you could have. I mean, if there is a shrine in America, that's it. Guarded, like those guys are serious. You can't just go up and, play around up there. So maybe that kind of thing. Although it's not miraculous, really. It's just us, remember. It's just us, yeah. Barbara and then Mickey.
Based on the first one, why isn't it something like the Grand Canyon, which demonstrates God's work?
Right. So
whether you can, like the first one, whether you can say it was specifically done for the people, but God,
Right. The reason, Barbara, is because there's other blessings to recite when seeing something of remarkable natural beauty.
Oh.
Like Baruch Oseh Maaseh Bereshit. Praise be God who, makes the things of creation. If you haven't seen the ocean in a long time, there's a blessing upon seeing the ocean for the first time in a while. This is one that's that talks about the theologies of a place inhering in that place. Yeah. Look, if it was a place where they still did idol worship, you could make the case you can't go there. And there are Jews who don't go to churches, Hindu shrines. Shrines are a bigger problem than churches. The halacha, at a certain point, the halacha basically said churches are not idol worship. They might be wrong, but they're not idol worshipers. And in the technical sense. But Hindus, I mean, they actually have idols. Buddha, right? You go to a Buddhist shrine, they're bowing in front of a human figure. So I personally am not bothered by that. I would go to a Buddhist shrine. That doesn't bother me. But I could understand. I don't, it's not my way, but I could understand someone who said, this is outside of the theology that I can stand it. I would argue with them because I think it's a misunderstanding of what they're seeing. But again, I could understand it. Not trying to defend it, just understand it. Yeah. Mickey.
The first thing that came to my mind, and I'm not sure it actually fits, but it's the Holocaust Museum in Washington. To me, that's a miracle. It's certainly referring to atrocities, but a recognition on the part of the American people, not just the Jewish people.
Right.
That this in fact happened. So that's the first thing that came to my mind. And I do think it's a miracle.
Yeah, look, in some ways, I think the mall is meant to evoke that.
Yeah.
Right? It's meant to be iconic. Yeah. Suzanne.
How can you give God credit for that and not blame for the Holocaust? I mean, to me, when you first posed the question, I thought, oh, what a great question. But then I started thinking about it, and I don't really believe there are miracles in our time. And by our time, I mean America's history.
Right. Yeah.
I disagree with that. I disagree. I mean, that's almost saying that we can't ever have miracles again. And before you had said that, that's what I was thinking, that we can have miracles in our time, and hopefully we'll have miracles in our future. And I do think things like the civil rights movement did have the hand of God in them.
Oh, divinely inspired, absolutely. But if it was a miracle, it would have happened hundreds of years ago. Not this.
I was just having an online conversation with an old elementary school friend of mine who's now an academic in England, and she was asking about this very question where we have a term, a notion, miracle, and we all think everybody means the same thing by it, but everybody does not mean the same thing by it. Right? Like one person says, oh, that birth was a miracle. Right? They had trouble conceiving, and they finally, through the miracle of modern science. Right? I mean, what an odd phrase, like many people think miracle of modern science, that's like an oxymoron, right? It's one of those words that we all use it to mean something that we assume other people know what we're talking about, but what's a miracle? I think that it sort of begs the question, are we supposed to only say this blessing at a place where the supernatural God reached into nature and stopped the natural order of things? Because that's one definition. Is this the subtler hand of God bringing people together, changing minds and spirits? Or is this just science? It has nothing to do with God. People invented that stuff and we made it happen, and God gave us our brain, I guess, but other than that, right. So depending on how you define that word, nes in Hebrew, or miracle, then you will either say this blessing a lot, or you will say it not a lot. Very rarely, like only when you're in the Sinai desert or somewhere in Israel. You visit the Maccabees site.
Modi'in.
Yeah, in Modi'in, right. Look, maybe the negative one is the one we should be using for the civil rights experience. So that, not that we say, in this place a miracle happened, but in this place, idol worship was uprooted. Like when I visit Stone Mountain.
Crazy eating habits.
So take a walk up Stone Mountain, I should say, hey, they used to burn crosses here.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about idol worship.
And
now half the people walking up the mountain are Black people.
She's
Praise God who uprooted,
just
evil from this place.
Of course, it means
I'm going to Stone Mountain later this weekend. I think I'm going to do that. I'm not kidding.
She likes to be up front.
I thought they still burn crosses there. I mean, it's Georgia.
No, not anymore. Stone Mountain has really, as a neighborhood, as an area, Stone Mountain is very diverse. Really, but I'll tell you a funny story. This is a true story of a guy at my synagogue in Atlanta.
Yeah, right. That makes more sense to me.
Who grew up here in Atlanta, went to high school in Atlanta way back when I was at Sheriff, he was in his 70s. So, he was a young kid in the heart of the 50s here in Atlanta. And he tells a story about how he was dating this non-Jewish girl at high school who must not have known that he was Jewish, or maybe did, or something like that. And she invited him out, to, a hangout, like, hey, let's go out Saturday night, we're going out. Like, okay. And they drove out to Stone Mountain, walked up Stone Mountain, and sure as bleep, there's everybody like gets out there and they like set up a cross and start burning it. And he's like, here's, he's got his little mezuzah. He's like, putting his mezuzah in here. And he's like, this is it. This is the night that I'm going to die. Like, she brought me out here to, kill me with her best friends, or kind of thing. And I think that sort of turned him off from dating non-Jewish girls, honestly. So like, maybe there's a plus in there, but that stuff was really going on. They had to condemn Stone Mountain legally to take away the permanent easement that had been given to the Klan by the guy who originally owned it. He gave permanent easement to the Klan. And the state of Georgia had to condemn the mountain in order to get around that legal loophole. It was a big deal, actually. It was like a definitive statement. We will end this easement. We're gonna do it. Condemn a mountain, like it's sort of ridiculous. But yeah, that's what it took, because it was privately held. Now it belongs to the state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe I'll call you a second, Cindy. Maybe I should wait until they remove that desecration from the side of that holy mountain. And then I can go up there and say, praise are you, God, who removed evil from this place. In case you didn't know my politics.
Oh, look at that grandchild.
Oh my God. Baruch she'asa nisim b'makom hazeh. Yes.
That's a miracle.
That is, what were you going to say, Cindy?
I was just going to say that, when you talked about when you've been up the Stone Mountain so many times, that you've never thought to say this blessing, and maybe you're not ready to say it yet,
Right.
Wait till they remove it. And maybe it's a challenge to all of us to look at our lives differently and to look for the miracles and to be aware that the miracle might be there. And it's sort of like, who is it in the Torah said God was in this place and I didn't know it.
Yeah,
What
Jacob.
was that?
Jacob.
So it's incumbent upon all of us to bring our awareness to our lives that maybe God was or will be in this place. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to bring God to this place. And it just, it's a challenge. It's a shift of awareness, so that we'll have the opportunity to say the blessing.
I really like that. And I do think a lot of it is in our own eyes, how you see things and being able to see the connectedness of things. And, you know, it wasn't guaranteed, just to continue the example of the civil rights movement, it wasn't guaranteed that they would win, that we, I should say, not they, that we would win, that we would emerge from that. It could have gone the other way. It still can. All those things are very fragile, and maybe the miracle is that there was enough human momentum in that direction that the wrong side didn't win, but that it's a very grounded and earthly miracle rather than a supernatural one. Again, I think it's a tough word to use, since it's like one of those, it's like sharing color experiences, right? Can I really say to you what I mean by those words and really convey? Will you really understand my sense of what miracle means, and will I understand yours? It would take a while, I think, for us to really commonly share some experience like that, because ultimately we're separate and our words mean different things to us. But I really like that, Cindy, that to take this Mishnah as a challenge to see where these kinds of things may really be. What places these really are. Great. Any others? Last comments?
Well, I
Yeah,
just
sure.
wanted to say that when this was written, they were looking at the places where these things had happened for them, that were holy places for them. And so
Right.
that was their time. That's why the ones you mentioned were mentioned. So
Right.
we have progressed, and that's why I think that we can have these sites in our lifetime too.
Nice. Right. And we would be doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
Right. They were responding to their history with a spiritual vocabulary, and maybe we can too. I like that. And I think I'm going to wrap it
Great
up. on that.
session.
Yeah, that was great. Outstanding. Outstanding. We'll jump to letter Vav next week. We're shifting to agriculture and very different kinds of topics. So it's always a different theme and different topics in this class. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Yeah,
Aye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.